Well, I think the impact it's going to have is to drive up inflation. I know the Democrats are trying to sell this as something that's going to fight inflation, but that's just nonsensical. You can't continue to spend money and think that, again, printing a bunch of money and spending that you don't have is somehow going to drive inflation down. It's going to be just the opposite. It's going to drive inflation up.
Sometimes things seem to take forever to work their way through the U.S. Congress, but every so often, a bill comes charging through, members not even entirely aware of what's in it, but they get on board because there's money in it for their individual states and for their constituents. Such is the one that they are now calling the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed by the Senate over the weekend. Must have been something special to keep all those members there on a weekend. Well, now it is off to the House members, but not before being put through the ringer. Why the Republicans are asking, are we rushing to spend billions more taxpayer money, as in your money, when inflation is already at a 40-year high? Governor Pete Ricketts of Nebraska is asking, and he's joining us on Centerpoint tonight for the first time. Governor, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
I won't quote the immortal words of Milton Friedman, but I will certainly cite them. The Nobel Prize-winning economist, now deceased, said often and repeatedly that there is only one cause of inflation, and that's when the government spends too much money or prints money that it doesn't have. Is that the case with this new bill?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the case. We can see what happened last year when the Democrats, along partisan lines then as well, passed a stimulus package that added $1.9 trillion to our economy. And you can trace the inflation we've been experiencing for the last 15 months or so directly back to that bill from March of 21. And now the Democrats want to double down and spend even more money that will just continue to drive inflation. We're at a 40-year high of inflation, 9.1%. It's a huge burden for our families here in the United States, and specifically here in Nebraska. I talk to families who have to curtail their family vacations, change the way they buy groceries to look for discounts or do without, change their driving habits. And this is all directly responsible. The Biden administration is all directly responsible for this. And now they're going to add to the family's woes by another big spending package that will primarily benefit the environmental lobby, Chinese Communist Party, because 80% of the solar panels are made in China. It's just something that makes no sense whatsoever. And kind of what you said is, why are they in a rush to pass such a bill?
Well, it's not just Milton Friedman or you or many of the opponents of this bill who feel that way. According to the Penn-Wharton budget model, which is nonpartisan, there's low confidence that the legislation will have any impact on inflation. Your reaction to that?
Well, I think the impact it's going to have is to drive up inflation. I know the Democrats are trying to sell this as something that's going to fight inflation, but that's just nonsensical. You can't continue to spend money and think that, again, printing a bunch of money and spending that you don't have is somehow going to drive inflation down. It's going to be just the opposite. It's going to drive inflation up. And again, you can tell that this is a bad bill because it was passed along partisan lines. You couldn't get even one Republican to say, yeah, this is a good idea.
And so what are the political implications of that?
Well, I think there's a worldview in Washington, D.C. that is completely out of touch with what normal people in the rest of the country feel. Regular people feel the effects of this inflation. They see the gas prices are high. They know this impacts them when they go to the grocery store. And to me, it's just unfathomable that they are continuing to double down on this really bad policy. And you can trace back this inflation to when they passed that stimulus bill back in March of 21, and apparently they have learned nothing from that. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's just a detachment from the real world that is leading to them to continue to pursue these bad policies.
Well, the real world in Nebraska is one largely of farming. You are a farm state, and you provide commodities literally to the world. People often say, what do farmers in Nebraska know about the world economy? Well, they know an awful lot because world commodity prices hit Nebraska farmers really hard, so they have to pay very, very close attention to it. But what are their feelings about this transition to renewable energy and putting fossil fuels on the back burner?
Yeah, you can see this war on American oil, American energy sector, has had a huge impact here in farm country. Diesel prices are above $5 a gallon, and that also drives input costs and things like for anhydrous ammonia, which goes into fertilizer. And so, for example, fertilizer costs are up triple from where they were last year. And even though we're seeing high commodity prices for things like beef and corn and soybeans, farm income is going to go down this year because input costs are so high. Again, going back to the president's war on American energy. So, I think that we want to have an all of the above strategy. We certainly want to explore different forms of energy. One of those forms of energy which the president is not supporting is ethanol. That is a renewable form of fuel for us that we can produce right here in our country. There's already a distribution system for it. We don't need to build out charging stations. We can start expanding our ethanol production, and that would also help people at the pump. It's about $1.20 a gallon cheaper than gasoline on the wholesale market. It'll help clean up the air, and of course, it'll be good for Nebraska's farmers and ranchers. And yet the Biden administration really hasn't done anything to help support the ethanol industry. All their focus has been on electric cars. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have an all-of-the-above strategy. I think we should. But understand that to have electric vehicles, you're going to have the charging stations. We don't have those all built out across the country, and certainly not in the rural parts of our country. And you're going to have to generate electricity. And at the same time that they're declaring war on American energy, they seem to just have a disconnect that to charge these cars with electricity, you have to have something that's actually going to run our power stations. And yet they're insisting on shutting down coal. They're not giving pipeline permits for natural gas. They just don't have a clear view of how this actually can work in the real world.
Are electric vehicles feasible on the farm as opposed to diesel tractors, diesel combines, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, today the answer would be no. I mean, certainly it's possible to be able to develop them. But that gets back to, again, the Biden administration is really jumping so far ahead on electric vehicles. They haven't really thought this through about how you actually charge those or whether or not those vehicles would be able to perform at the level that an internal combustion engine will for things that we need, like farming. Certainly, air travel would be another example of that. You're not going to have an electric airplane. And so, the ethanol industry is one of the ways that we could help clean up the environment with this, and they're totally ignoring that aspect of it. So I think the Biden administration is really held hostage by these radical environmentalists who have not thought through how you do things in the real world. And that's going to cause significant problems for us, and is actually causing problems for us already when you look at the stability of our power grid.
Well, the Biden administration was being held hostage by one particular senator, two, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, but also Kyrsten Sinema, until Senator Schumer agreed to include a provision for carried interest for private equity firms, preserving that carried interest for private equity firms. What is the purpose of preserving that piece in this legislation?
Well, I got to tell you, that is not something that impacts us here in Nebraska as significantly as it may in some other states. So I don't know the motivation behind Senator Manchin, for example, wanting to include that. It is certainly one of the things that private equity firms look to be able to generate profits for their shareholders themselves as the people who run it. And, I'm never going to be in favor of raising people's taxes. So it perhaps is that Senator Manchin just doesn't want to raise taxes. And I'm on board with that. But if you look at the rest of that bill, they're raising taxes on Americans all across the spectrum. And so it does seem odd that they picked that one to single out to not raise taxes.
And that what you just said there, raising taxes on everybody, is basically a reflection that this 15% tax on corporate entities gets translated down to the everyday buyer.
Absolutely. Yeah, corporations pass all those taxes on to their consumers, and that's because that's how they have to stay in business. They have to have a profit to be able to be sustainable. And it gets back to, if we're talking sustainability from an environmental standpoint, Democrats really need to be thinking about sustainability from an economic standpoint. If you don't have economic sustainability, nothing else is going to matter. You can look at developing nations that don't have economic stability, and the quality of their environment suffers because of it. The first thing you have to take care of is that economic stability, because that's what allows you to be able to move on to focus on things like the environment.
On the political front, again, if Republicans retake the House, as many expect, and possibly the Senate, although the chances of that are a bit less, what options do they have to restrain the components of this bill, if any?
Well, Yeah, I think one of the things that if the House is able to retake, if the Republicans are able to retake the House, that one of the things they're going to have to look at is how these laws are structured, because the House has control of the purse strings. They get to make the appropriations. And so there may be opportunities, and again, I defer to people whose expertise this is, but there may be opportunities to be able to not fund some of these programs and therefore not drive up inflation. And that's one of the things that should Republicans take over the House, they're going to have to look very carefully how they manage those purse strings, how they restore, restrain spending, because that's one of the biggest problems that we have right now is, getting back to your quote from Milton Friedman, is spending too much money.
Looking past the midterm elections of 2022 to the presidential race of 2024, do you expect Donald Trump to run again?
I certainly would not want to predict anything that Donald Trump does. So I am not even going to hazard a guess on that.
Well, let me read you a tweet from Brit Hume and get your reaction to it. Brit tweeted yesterday, "The problem with Trump isn't that he doesn't motivate a large segment of the Republican Party. The problem is that he motivates every segment of the Democratic Party. That's how geriatric Joe Biden got all those millions of votes. They were anti-Trump votes." Is that accurate?
Well, I would say that, President Trump did a fantastic job. And you look at the policies that led to record number of jobs in America, the closing of the income inequality gap for the first time in decades, the record high employment levels for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans. We saw just brilliant economic policies. And that's something that has benefited our entire country. When it comes to election time in 2024, what will matter is who are the choices that we have on the ballot. And, like I said, President Trump's policies really did a great job. But we know that, it's going to be who are the candidates that Republican voters will have to select from when it comes to that Republican primary. And they'll have to run a good campaign and debate it out just like they do every 4 years.
Well, there's also increasing speculation about who the Democratic nominee will be, especially when you have guys like David Axelrod, the architect of the Obama campaign and the Obama presidency, expressing serious doubts about the wherewithal of the President of the United States, Joe Biden. I wonder if you'll take a look at this recent clip of him just today in Kentucky, meeting with flood victims and what he had to say. Listen up.
It's not like it's beyond our control. The weather may be beyond our control for now, but it's not beyond our control.
Let me just repeat that. He said the weather may be beyond our control, but it is not beyond our control. Are you concerned about these increasing number of gaffes, apparent increasing number of gaffes on the part of the president?
Yeah, I mean, I think that President Biden is really becoming known for his gaffes, especially his verbal gaffes like the one we just witnessed. And I think the thing that, frankly, is going to impact Americans more is going to be his terrible policies. I mean, his war on American energy has led to gas prices at one point being double where they were when he took office. That impacts Americans' everyday lives. You look at what he's done with regard to inflation, just in general, spending money that drives up grocery prices. He's focused on his woke agenda versus trying to help moms get baby formula. I mean, this is an administration that has all the wrong priorities. And while I think the president may, make these verbal gaffes, what really is harming American people, American families, are his terrible policies that are hitting him in the pocketbook.
Governor Pete Ricketts of Nebraska, really appreciate your appearing for the first time on Centerpoint. Thanks for your perspective, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Hi, I'm Doug McKelway, and thank you for watching Centerpoint. We hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Leave a comment below and keep the conversation going by sharing this video with a friend who needs to see it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.